Eragon understood why Morin was so upset. People need that money. We can't get by without it. What kind of stories? Morin snorted.
They say the Varden have formed a pact with the Ergos and are massing an army to attack us. Supposedly, it's only through the grace of our king that we've been protected for so long. As if Galbatorix would care if we burned to the ground. Go listen to them. I have enough on my hands without explaining their lies.
The first trader filled the chair with his enormous girth. His every movement caused it to protest loudly. There was no hint of hair on his face. His pudgy hands were baby smooth, and he had pouting lips that curled petulantly as he sipped from a flagon. The second man had a florid face. The skin around his jaw was dry and crupulent, filled with lumps of hard fat, like cold butter gone rancid. Contrasted with his neck and jowls, the rest of his body was unnaturally thin. The first trader vainly tried to pull back his expanding borders to fit within his chair. He said,
No,
you don't understand. It is only through the king's unceasing efforts on your behalf that you are able to argue with us in safety. If he, in all his wisdom, were to withdraw that support, woe unto you. Someone hollered, Right, why don't you tell us that the riders have returned and you've each killed 100 elves? Do you think we're children to believe in your tales? We can take care of ourselves. The group chuckled. The trader started to reply when his thin companion intervened with a wave of his hand. Gaudy jewels flashed on his fingertips. You misunderstand. And we know that the Empire cannot care for each of us personally, as you may want, but it can keep Urgles and other abominations from overrunning this. He searched vaguely for the right term. Place. The trader continued. You're angry with the Empire for treating people unfairly, a legitimate concern, but the government cannot please everyone. There will inevitably be arguments and conflicts. However, the majority of us have nothing to complain about. Every country has some small group of malcontents who aren't satisfied with the balance of power. Yeah, called a woman, if you're willing to call the Varden small. The fat man sighed. We already explained that the Varden have no interest in helping you. That's only a falsehood perpetuated by the traitors in an attempt to disrupt the Empire and convince us that the real threat is inside, not outside, our borders. All they want to do is overthrow the king and take possession of our land. They have spies everywhere. As they prepare to invade, you never know who might be working for them. Eragon did not agree, but the trader's words were smooth, and people were nodding. He stepped forward and said, How do you know this? I can say that clouds are green, but that doesn't mean it's true. Prove you aren't lying. The two men glared at him while the villagers waited silently for the answer. The thin trader spoke first. Aren't you children taught respect? Or do you let boys challenge men whenever they want to? The listeners fidgeted and stared at Eragon. Then a man said, Answer the question.
It's only common sense,
said the fat one, sweat beading on his upper lip. His reply riled the villagers, and the dispute resumed. Eragon returned to the bar with a sour taste in his mouth. He had never before met anyone who favored the Empire and tore down its enemies. There was a deep-seated hatred of the Empire in Carvajal, almost hereditary in nature. The Empire never helped them during harsh years when they nearly starved, and its tax collectors were heartless. He felt justified in disagreeing with the traitors regarding the king's mercy, but he did not speculate about the Varden. The Varden were a rebel group that constantly raided and attacked the Empire. It was a mystery who their leader was, or who had formed them. In the years following Galbatorix's rise to power over a century ago, the group had garnered much sympathy, as they eluded Galbatorix's efforts to destroy them. Little was known about the Varden, except that if you were a fugitive and had to hide, or if you hated the Empire, they would accept you. The only problem was finding them. Morn leaned over the bar and said,
Incredible, isn't it? They're worse than vultures circling a dying animal. There's going to be trouble if they stay much longer.
For us or them?
Them,
said Morn as angry voices filled the tavern. Eragon left when the argument threatened to become violent. The door thudded shut behind him, cutting off the voices. It was clearly evening, and the sun was sinking rapidly. The houses cast long shadows on the ground. As Eragon headed down the street, he noticed Rowan and Katrina standing in an alley. Rowan said something Eragon could not hear. Katrina looked down at her hands and answered in an undertone, then leaned up on her tiptoes and kissed him before darting away. Eragon trotted to Rowan and teased, Having a good time? Rowan grunted noncommittally as he paced away. Have you heard the trader's news? Asked Eragon, following. Most of the villagers were indoors, talking to traders or waiting until it was dark enough for the troubadours to perform. Yeah. Rowan seemed distracted. What do you think of Sloane? I thought it was obvious. There will be blood between us when he finds out about Katrina and me, stated Rowan. A snowflake landed on Eragon's nose, and he looked up. The sky had turned gray. He could think of nothing appropriate to say. Rowan was right. He clapped his cousin on the shoulder as they continued down the byway. Dinner at Horst's was hearty. The room was full of conversation and laughter. Sweet cordials and heavy ales were consumed in copious amounts, adding to the boisterous atmosphere. When the plates were empty, Horst's guests left the house and strolled to the field where the traders were camped. A ring of poles, topped with candles, had been stuck into the ground around a large clearing. Bonfires blazed in the background, painting the ground with dancing shadows. The villagers slowly gathered around the circle and waited expectantly in the cold. The troubadours came tumbling out of their tents, dressed in tassel clothing, followed by older and more stately minstrels. The minstrels provided music and narration as their younger counterparts acted out the stories. The first plays were pure entertainment, bawdy and full of jokes, pratfalls, and ridiculous characters. Later, however, when the candles sputtered in their sockets, and everyone was drawn together in a tight circle, the old storyteller Brom stepped forward. A knotted white beard rippled over his chest, and a long black cape was wrapped around his bent shoulders, obscuring his body. He spread his arms with hands that reached out like talons and recited thus: